Okay, so when you say that you maybe expect or it's beyond time for the Supreme Court to weigh in on this, what do you mean? Like, would they instruct the lower court? Would they have to rule on a case? Like, what? Explain to me what you mean by that.
So they have a lot to rule on. I think is the short answer here. I mean, including on actual underlying substantive constitutional questions such as the birthright citizenship question there. So there's a lot that they're going to have to rule on here sooner rather than later. But I think that immunizing, so to speak, the nationwide injunction ruling is probably the number one most pressing priority here, because without a definitive ruling that ends this entire charade, this judicial insurrection there, the executive branch is effectively brought to a halt. And the way that works is that the DOJ has to tee it up. So the Solicitor General of the United States, the acting Solicitor General, because John Sauer, I do not believe has been confirmed yet as the actual Solicitor General. So the acting Solicitor General and the acting Office of Legal Counsel, all the various lawyers there in the DOJ bureaucracy who work on filing cert petitions, which is kind of a fancy legal way of saying that's how you get a case before the Supreme Court there. You guys should be appealing one of these so-called nationwide injunctions and trying to directly tee up for review for the Supreme Court. The straight up legal question is a so-called nationwide injunction compatible with Article 3 of the Constitution? Is this encompassed within the so-called judicial power there? Now, it's a so-called rule of four. You need 4 of the 9 justices to actually grant cert in a particular case. That's less than a majority, frankly. And I think they have the votes. I would be shocked, frankly. I'd be flabbergasted. Who? I think, well, clearly Thomas Alito and Gorsuch, I think, would be very skeptical of nationwide injunctions there. And from there, you would need one of Roberts, Kavanaugh, or Barrett. Honestly, I think it's a possibility that all 3 of them would want to weigh in there, really. I mean, what you're dealing with here, John Roberts likes to talk a big game, Liz, about the legitimacy of the court there, or the perceived legitimacy. And he has a rather peculiar way of going about that, I think would be a charitable way of saying it. But surely, at a time like this, where half the country is looking at these far left lower court black robe tyrants trying to put in their chambers in Rhode Island or California, try to bring the entirety of DC to a halt there. That is a major glaring red flag problem for the legitimacy of Hamilton's least dangerous brand. So I think that even Roberts should be sympathetic to it.
So the Trump administration could today, if they wanted to, through the Solicitor General, file an appeal with Supreme Court on one of these nationwide injunctions, and thus encourage, it couldn't force the Supreme Court to rule, but encourage the Supreme Court to rule on this and actually address the nationwide injunctions. In the meantime, if it is so obvious, which I think it is pretty obvious, it's a little nerdy, but if you look at everything you laid out, the constitutional role of the judiciary, what the judiciary is doing, and the judiciary is kind of like an all-encompassing term, right? The Supreme Court, it's different than these lower courts. Do we have, or does the Trump administration have an obligation to follow these nationwide injunctions while they are pursuing legal recourse? Or because they are so blatantly unconstitutional, should they just ignore them and proceed?
In my opinion, the administration only has a legal obligation to follow a judgment as it pertains to the named parties to a particular lawsuit. But you don't have to actually extend it a millimeter further. So, I mean, just to give one example of that, okay? So birthright citizenship, let's take that because that's a very high-profile piece of litigation. By the way, Trump's totally right on the 14th Amendment actual argument. I wrote a column on this a few weeks ago. I've been arguing this since I was a first-year law student. So he's totally right on the actual substantive constitutional question over the 14th Amendment. Nonetheless, you've had at least 3 judges thus far who have ruled, and they've put on various types of temporary restraining orders or injunctions trying to sweep the nation there, that he actually can't do this. Okay, well, who's actually going to sue then in that case in Seattle, Washington? I mean, who is the underlying plaintiff there? I mean, is it someone who was born to illegal alien children? Let's just make up a country here. Let's say that person was from Honduras. Okay, so then that judge's ruling actually binds that particular Honduran national, and he actually has citizenship for now under that judge's ruling there. But the notion that this ruling in Seattle, Washington about a Honduran national can possibly bind people who are born here illegally in my state of Florida or in Ohio or Massachusetts or whatever from all over the world. It's crazy. You actually do not have to respect that judgment, and you actually do not have to issue a passport or a social security number or anything like that. That would be my understanding as to the extent to which the Trump administration is bound.